Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our webinar series focused on early post-secondary opportunities in Kentucky. My name is Robin Hebert, and I am joined today by my CPE colleague, Trinity Walsh. We are excited to host today's session on behalf of CPE's Student Access and Success Unit. We're especially excited to launch this new school year with discussions focused on Kentucky's big goals, especially for more and more of our Kentuckians to earn a post-secondary degree or credential that leads to a fulfilling career, earning potential, and a stronger Kentucky all around. We have a renewed focus this year on student outcomes. What happens to our students, and how do we open up doors for them to make the most of these opportunities? So here at CPE, we are convinced that opening up these opportunities for students to experience college and advanced coursework while they're still in high school can really change the trajectory of their futures in positive ways. It's a lot of work, no doubt, but it is well worth the effort for our Kentucky students. And that's what this webinar series is really all about. We are going to hear from experts and researchers and practitioners, any stakeholder in this ecosystem that we're in together, so that we can make sure that anyone in Kentucky who wants to pursue post-secondary education is able to do that and well supported so that they can make that dream a reality. So today, we're going to kick things off with a couple of other wonderful colleagues and our research gurus from here at the Council on Post-Secondary Education. Dr. Chris Ledford, who is the Associate Director of Data and Advanced Analytics, is in the house, along with Adam Blevins, the Senior Associate in that same department. Chris and Adam are here to share some exciting results from their recent analysis of dual credit outcomes in Kentucky. Now, you all know, I love hearing good news in this space, and you're in for some good news today. So that's always great. So Chris, Adam, welcome. We're so happy to have you here on our first webinar of this year's series. So we're ready to hear a summary of your research findings. So Trinity and I are going to disappear for a few minutes and leave you all to share some of your exciting results, and then we'll be back for a little bit of conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. First and foremost, I want to say, and I think I speak for both Adam and myself, we're so excited to be able to do stuff like this. We recognize so many folks on this call, and obviously the work that you do, Robin and Trinity, and to be able to come in and partake in this good news and share it back out to the folks who are really making all this great news happen, these great data happen. It's just a tremendous honor for us. So thank you so much for having us, and thanks to everybody on the group here on the call for all the work that you do around the state and especially around dual credit. Hopefully I can get my screen shared here and we will dive in. All right. So today we're going to be kind of giving an update on the kind of state of dual credit in Kentucky through the lens of that dual credit attainment goal. So our presentation is entitled Dual Credit Promotes Matriculation, Success, and Completion. And through the lens of that big picture goal, that really aggressive, bold goal that Kentucky set, that Kentucky will have 50% of its high school graduates completing at least one dual credit course with a qualifying grade of a C or higher. That's the context in which we're coming at this today. But why is that? It's important to think, why does that goal matter in the first place? Why do we have this goal? And you all know the answer to that. An abundance of national research, state research, CPE research, controlled studies, descriptive studies, and on I could go. Time and time again show the positive benefits of dual credit in terms of matriculating to college or the college going rate. And then once matriculated, student success in the first year, retention into subsequent years, and ultimately going on to earn a post-secondary credential and completing. So in this presentation, we're going to take stock. We're going to see where are we in terms of these important metrics? How are we faring in terms of those goals? And then at the end, we'll come back and kind of contextualize that in terms of some opportunities that we have to sustain the great progress that you're about to hear about. So with that said, here comes some good news. I'm going to turn it over to my friend, Adam Blevins. Adam, take us away.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for having me here today. Very excited to be speaking with you. And as Chris said, to be sharing this great news with you. I love it when I have an easy job like that. But today we're really going to start by diving in, if I can get the slide to advance. All right, perfect. Perfect. So today we're going to begin firstly by looking at our dual credit participation, both in terms of the enrollment counts and the proportion of students participating in dual credit. And then subsequently, we'll start looking at some of those post-secondary outcomes where some of that really, really good news comes into play. So first up, we see here for our dual credit enrollment going back to 2017-18, we're seeing about a 51% growth over that period in terms of just the raw count of dual credit enrollment at our Kentucky high schools. And similarly, we see our dual credit hours earned also increasing over that time, going up by about 57% over the same time period. So going from around 183,000 credit hours earned all the way up to now almost 287,000. So some fantastic increases in terms of both enrollment and the number of credit hours earned through dual credit for Kentucky students. But we don't care just about the raw enrollment, right? We care about the proportion of students who are actually participating as well. And we see consistently good news here, just the same. So going back to 2016, we see about a 19.1 percentage point increase in terms of the actual number of Kentucky high school students. Well, these are graduation classes, high school graduating seniors participating in dual credit. And the big picture here with respect to our goal of having 50% of graduating Kentucky high school students successfully complete at least one dual credit course in their high school career, we see that we are well on our way to that goal, given about an 18 percentage point increase since 2016 here as well. So like I said, that would be a really quick kind of descriptive look at the dual credit participation side of this, which is only really the beginning of the story, because really what we want to emphasize is what that means once students get to post-secondary education, once they get to a college or university. And we're going to start by looking kind of at the front end of this, and we'll take this through kind of that post-secondary life cycle, starting at matriculation or college going. But up front, I'd also just like to denote that for all of these slides, we'll be using the blue lines to show dual credit participants or attempters, and the orange lines will always be our non-participant or non-attempters for dual credit. And so that being said, looking at the actual graph itself, so we see over time, college going rates have been decreasing over time. But more importantly in this graph, at least for our conversation today, is that we see a widening gap in terms of the matriculation rates for our dual credit participants or attempters and our non-dual credit participant or attempters. So in 2022, for that graduating high school class, we saw dual credit participants matriculate at a rate of about 76% and non-participants matriculate at a rate of about 36%. So nearly a 40 percentage point gap in terms of the actual matriculation of those students into a post-secondary institution. So moving on just a little bit. So, that's the beginning of the college career. Now we're looking at our first year GPA. So how did students do in their first year once they got to that post-secondary institution? And we see again that this really bears out between our dual credit participants and our non-participants, that our dual credit students are performing at a higher level with regard to GPA, their first year GPA. And that's on average about a 40.45 point GPA difference here in our students in the most recent year, being about 2.38 for our non-participants, 2.92 for our participants in terms of their first year GPA. Now, unmet financial need is another one of these big areas that we want to emphasize. And there's a lot that goes into this. Of course, this is descriptive data that we're sharing with you today. But what we see is that our dual credit students have about $1,400 less in unmet financial need compared to non-participants. Now, unmet financial need is the amount of money students still have to pay after all of their non-loan awards and grants are calculated out of their final bill. And so to have a $1,400 gap between these two student groups is pretty substantial, especially when we think about this in terms of the aggregate. And while there's a lot that is captured in the unmet financial need descriptives here, one of the other big pictures is that dual credit students are likely pulling in more competitive grants and awards that maybe non-participants would not be eligible for or not be as competitive for when enrolling into a post-secondary institution. So that's just a piece of this story, and we hope to kind of bear this out as we continue working through our dual credit research. But that's a huge part of this as well, aside from just academic aspect of this performance gap or this gap between our participants and our non-participants. Shifting forward, we'll look now at first term credit hours. And while the numbers are pretty tight, we see about 13 credit hours compared to 14 credit hours between these two groups in terms of their first term hours attempted at a post-secondary institution. There's only about a 1 credit hour difference here, but really when we think about timely degree completion, this could be a really big deal, right? Time to degree is really important, particularly when we think about our 4-year program. So for those, you typically need about 15 credit hours a term to graduate in 4 years. And we see that dual credit students are much closer, or dual credit participants are much closer to that mark than our non-participants. And while this may not be a huge gap in the first term, when you think about this in terms of subsequent terms moving forward, that's when this really kind of compounds and becomes a bigger deal. When we think about time to degree and, of course, the financial pieces that go into staying in college longer, the likelihood of completing, all of those aspects are also kind of included here, which makes it a really vital part of this conversation as well. And now we start looking at kind of our big picture things. So, we always talk about student retention and completion or graduation rates. And that's really what we're looking at here. So kind of the back half of that post-secondary pipeline. And what we see is that dual credit students are again performing at a higher rate in terms of their retention from their first year to their second year compared to non-participants at about 12 percentage points higher rate compared to our non-participants there. And just to continue this forward, when we look at this in terms of completions, we again see a really compelling picture that dual credit participants generally see really big boosts compared to our non-participants. So about 66% of our dual credit participants completed a credential or a degree, compared to about 45% of our non-participants. So all this being said, taken collectively, when we look at these data from start to finish, we get a really strong descriptive image that dual credit has a meaningful impact, not only on getting students to matriculate and to actually enroll at a post-secondary institution, but also for them to eventually complete their degree or their credential. So, in a way, a lot of this descriptive stuff is painting a picture that dual credit impacts a student's post-secondary journey, not just, at the beginning, but essentially from beginning to end. And so, that was a lot of information. We're happy, of course, to discuss this later on in this presentation and to share our slides out as well. But that's the fantastic news, is the huge gains in dual credit enrollment, participation, credit hours earned, as well as those really fantastic success metrics that I just went over. So that's what I have for today. I'll hand it back over to Chris.
Well, thank you so much, Adam. And, as we start to think about this good news, one thing I want to get out on the front end, and you hit this early on, but I think it's so important in this discussion that it's worth mentioning again. Folks have seen kind of in the past few minutes a set of slides where we have a gap between our dual credit participants and our non-participants. And Adam and I have taken the time to kind of parse those out by income groups, as measured by free and reduced lunch status, racial and ethnic groups in our high school populations. And we find that those differences in college going or matriculation rates and those differences in success metrics, they hold for all of those groups that I mentioned across demography and across socioeconomic status. So it's important to think about just the benefits of dual credit generally, but also dual credit has the potential to be so, and is in fact in the data that we have looked at, a gap closure, an equity vehicle. So keep that in mind. One other thing that's really important, dual credit, as I just mentioned, is important to the individual. It's important while they're in high school. It's a vehicle for success later. And we know the positive benefits that has when you take all of those students together, the return on investment of a degree and the importance of going to college and all that good stuff. But also in the macro level sense, the importance of dual credit presents an opportunity in terms of what I've been calling lately an inflection point for matriculating enrollment in Kentucky. Folks on this call, I recognize a lot of folks in here, so I'm pretty comfortable talking about an enrollment cliff or a population cliff that I think we've all been talking about and kind of discussing in our circles. And what does that mean for post-secondary education? What does that mean for secondary education? And here at CPE, we've been kind of working on this, trying to get ahead of this. So for some context, in the next several years, Kentucky's 15 to 19 age population is going to start declining as a result of declining birth rates during the Great Recession era. So those students now who were born during that period of time when there were fewer births, they're coming of age now, and the population of high school age students will start to decrease about a little over 5% between now and 2025, a little over 6% between now and 2035 before starting to rebound a little bit. And you can kind of see starting around 2022 there at that peak of 306,094, what our estimated population of 15 to 19 or high school age students looks like. These are outputs of predictive models that we've been running with census data and projections from the state data center. So what does this population change mean for our high school students, our high school cohorts? Well, unsurprisingly, is that demographic of our population shrinks, so too will our public high school graduate cohort sizes. Our predictive models estimate, I'm going to say conservatively, that our graduating cohorts, so our graduating senior cohorts, could shrink almost 3% between now and 2025, and perhaps a little beyond that 3% mark going out to 2035. Pardon my typo there, that second statistic should say 2022 and 2035. So if you think about that, if our college going rate stays the same, if there are not any systemic shocks to that, and our population of high school graduates declines, that means we're going to have less students matriculating as first-time students to our institutions. That's where dual credit is so important. In the background, we're thinking about how we can re-engage adult learners, non-traditional learners, and other things throughout the pipeline once matriculated. But dual credit has got an equally important and powerful part of this story. If we sustain this progress, if we keep getting students involved in early post-secondary opportunities like we've been doing, if we sustain this incredible progress towards that dual credit goal, we can offset some of these population changes and come out better in the long run than we are now or what we're forecasted to be. As it stands, without any changes to the system, Based on these numbers, Kentucky would need to increase its college going rate by almost a percentage point and a half to increase the current count of matriculating students. Again, if we can keep driving progress in dual credit and other initiatives too, of course, we've got an opportunity to kind of offset these changes that folks around the country are going to be dealing with, including us right here in Kentucky. Another opportunity, don't lose sight of the forest for the trees here, because I've got a coming slide to help contextualize this. But what you're looking at are you see a series of dots that are over the last 6 years that represent area development districts in Kentucky. And I know it's kind of hard to see which ones are which there. I'm gonna dive into that more on the next slide. But in this slide, I hope you can take away the variance or the distance that those dots cover, from around 20% participation in some cases to almost 60%. There's great variation across area in Kentucky in dual credit participation. There's an opportunity there. So when we dig into that, this is just looking at the most recent year for which we have these data in 2021. So our 2021 graduating seniors, you'll notice kind of down here at the bottom, you've got the KIPTA area, which is the Louisville area, the Bluegrass area, which is the Lexington area, and Northern Kentucky in this particular year has kind of moved up. But those three areas, KIPTA, Bluegrass, and Northern Kentucky, are typically the bottom three or near the bottom three in terms of dual credit participation in those areas. Now, if you think about that in terms of raw counts, the number of folks across the state who did not participate in dual credit in 2021 who graduated in that cohort, 50% of those students came from the KIPTA and Bluegrass districts. So if we can, perhaps dive deeper with some evidence, maybe some qualitative approach. I'm just the data guy. I don't know the nuances of some of these data, but that's one thing that sticks out to me as an opportunity for improvement. I know we're talking about two large metro areas and some challenges perhaps with transportation, staffing. I don't know, but that's kind of where my mind goes, and maybe we can add context to that with the expertise in this group. Another thing that we zoomed in on, and I know the CEC, this work group, and other work groups are intently focused on, is shoring up participation between demographic groups insofar as their participation in dual credit. Here you've got a series of lines that I hope I can make a little better sense of for you. That red line in the middle is all graduates in those cohort years, graduating high school cohorts. So that's kind of the mean over time, the participation rate for the state. Above that red line, you have two lines. One is a gray one for paid lunch students, and the other one is for non-URM students. Their inverses are the two lines below the red line. So the purple line is free and reduced price lunch students, or what we often use as a proxy for low income students. And then that bottom line is URM students. So you can see about a 21 percentage point gap between the income demographic groups, and about a 15 percentage point gap, 14 percentage point gap between URM and non-URM students. So again, another area to kind of increase participation to close gaps. And again, as I said earlier, this is so important because when we look at the impact on college going rates, on success once matriculated, on financial outcomes once matriculated, ultimately retention, and then success, that completion of a credential, the impact of dual credit in inferential studies and in these descriptive data hold. The impact holds across groups, which makes shoring up these gaps in participation that you're looking at now so critical to the work that we're doing. And I know everybody's heavily invested in that across the state, and appreciate that great work. So again, kind of summarizing and wrapping up, dual credit participation is growing rapidly over time. The completion rate and our progress toward that goal is increasing rapidly. The lull through the COVID period that you saw in there was very minimal, and I fully expect and I'm optimistic that that sharp upward line will continue on that path in the coming years as we start getting new data. And again, those participation rates, those students who participate have better outcomes in post-secondary education, and they're more likely to matriculate in the first place. Some opportunities across region and demographics, and as a state with our looming, people say demographic cliff or population cliff. I'm going to call it a divot that we've got coming up. So that's kind of what we've got. Again, I really appreciate your time and all of the work that goes into these great data. Happy to take any questions or any suggestions. We're here to help. So anything that comes to mind, please let us know. Thanks.
All right, Chris and Adam, thank you all so much for the presentation and for explaining and helping us to understand kind of the research behind dual credit and what it all really means. Here in just a second, I'd like to open up for some questions that our participants can drop into the Q&A box that we can bring to you. But before we do that, I had a couple of follow-up questions that I just wanted to ask you, and maybe Trinity has a couple of questions as well. But, as you were talking, Chris, about the population challenges that we have, I was also thinking about, ultimately our big goal is supportive of Kentucky's economy and having an adequate workforce, well-prepared workforce. And I suppose those needs won't go down as our population trends down, that the needs that we have in our workforce will still stay the same. And so it's really important for more and more students, to be trained and ready for those jobs that are coming up. So really, I had two questions that I want to just toss out there for the two of you, and then I'll toss the ball over to Trinity, and she can ask anything she has as well. But the first is, I just would like you to reiterate a little bit about, we're always concerned about those students who are underrepresented in our data, like they're not participating at the same rates, such as males or students with disabilities, students from low-income homes, and underrepresented minority students. I just wanted to make sure that I heard you correctly, that these positive outcomes of dual credit still hold true for the students who are in these underrepresented groups. Like if we can get them into participation, that the positives will hold true for these student demographics as well. Can you just speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one thing you mentioned, you were talking about the positive outcomes and then kind of the economic outcomes. Like we're first, it's important to remember that we're talking about human beings, and dual credit is a vehicle to college, to a credential. And, depending on what that credential is, an associate's degree earner is going to earn $600,000 more on average in their lifetime than somebody who just finished with a high school degree. That number jumps to 1.5 million in Kentucky for a bachelor's degree earner. Dual credit is a vehicle that sets you up for success to get to those positive returns on investment. And then, of course, that contributes to the state overall, like you mentioned. But like we were kind of talking about, we're facing a challenge with birth rates and circumstances that occurred nearly 20 years ago that are going to be affecting our population now. We're working to get more students into the pipeline from non-traditional backgrounds, but dual credit is a great vehicle to make sure that we're keeping those students matriculating that we do have, and those as that population shrinks. To your second point, if you think about some of the slides that we went through, like Adam was really highlighting over time, that 6-year period from 16 to 22, a 35 to 40 percentage point gap in college going rates between dual credit participants and non-participants. And then he kind of transitioned into some financial indicators, some success indicators. All of those charts, if you were to subsample for data folks or to filter, they would look the same for our other racial and ethnic groups, for high income, low income groups, which is huge.
Yes.
The more folks from those varied backgrounds that we can get participating in dual credit matters, because the positive outcomes, the benefits, the future success indicators, they hold for all of those groups. It to speak to the robustness of that statement, we find that here in our descriptive data, but CPE has done controlled inferential studies in the past, both at our 4-year institutions and our 2-year institutions, and we found the evidence there too. So, just a preponderance of evidence about the benefit of dual credit, and it holds regardless of the student's background. Adam, anything you want to add to that?
No, I really couldn't say it any better. In terms of pretty much everything I went through in terms of these success metrics, yes, it bears throughout. The only other note I would have, this may be a bigger conversation or something we continue to look at. We know male enrollment across the nation, but in Kentucky as well, has also been declining. So, that could be another excellent area for us to kind of look at this and the potential implications it may have for gap closing. But yeah, it's a dual credit may be a very powerful tool that we can leverage as a state to improve our matriculation and our success in post-secondary.
Wow, that's some of the best news for me. That's some of the best news that you all have today. I know that for those of us who are trying to think about, and for our participants today who are working in post-secondary institutions or in high schools, the challenge now is to figure out, okay, how do we get those students to dual credit so that they can take advantage of those benefits. I've heard anecdotally from a lot of our stakeholder feedback that students, for us, Chris, that economic data is very compelling for those of us, who are adults and kind of understand what those economic indicators would mean for us. But for somebody who's 14, 15, 16 years old, those might not be compelling reasons to take a dual credit, class. They don't really connect all the dots about how that could potentially impact their earning potential throughout their lives. So I'm eager to hear some of the conversation. So I just had one other question, then I'm going to toss it over to Trinity, and that is, if you were going to pick one piece of this compelling data that you have shared with us today, that the participants on our call today should really take a look at or really pay attention to for each of you, what would that be? What would be the one thing that they should be, okay, this thing is really, really important?
One thing, I would say the thing that jumps out to me, and again, I know a lot of the folks here, and I know the work they do, and these numbers are so great, and I know that there's that it takes a village mentality behind it. I know folks are so invested in this, working across our campuses and with this group, the CEC, ultimately legislators who make some of this work possible with funding. And you see that in great statistics that we've shown today. I would love to collaboration is making that happen, and it's going to make it continue to happen. So, I would say congratulations, but let's not be complacent, and let's get there to that 50% mark, because it matters. All the slides after that say it matters. The other thing, we've kind of hit already. For me, equitable outcomes, gap closing opportunities that ultimately translate to benefits for us all. There are some gaps across geography. There are some gaps in participation and completion across demographic groups. But in terms of looking at those groups when they do participate and complete, the college going rate bump or difference. The boost is the same. It holds. The success is the same. So just a tremendous opportunity that dual credit presents. The final thing I would say, and Robin, I'm kind of piggybacking on something you said about the ROI, and we hit that, but Adam had a slide in there, um, about the financial barriers that kind of emerge between students who have participated in dual credit and not. And that's because students who are coming in with credit and opportunities, they're receiving scholarships, they're getting more aid at institutions that are giving out, various awards to their students in-house. Dual credit students are more likely to get those, and that makes that achievement of that ROI, that light at the end of the tunnel, that $1.2 million bachelor's degree over a lifetime, it makes that ROI happen quicker, if that makes sense. You've got less financial burden as a college student, so you get to reap the benefits of that ROI quicker. And that's huge when you're talking about gap closing across socioeconomic status and demographic groups. That's the huge thing to me.
Yeah.
Adam, what do you
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, especially with the point on collaboration. But the only other comment I would have is essentially a way of saying this is all really important, and it's that what we see is dual credit isn't just important at the front. It's not just important to get students into a college, right? It is something that lasts. It's something that persists with them as they go through that pipeline, whether that's matriculating their first year GPA, what that may determine in terms of internship opportunities, other grants, other awards they may pursue later. And eventually, it all culminates in that retention rate. It all culminates in the completion or graduation rate. So, the important work that's being done, especially early on, high school into that first year of college, I mean, that's long lasting impact. And you want to carry that through to talk about ROI and things like that. So post graduation outcomes. Yeah, no, that's a huge part of this conversation. And again, it's a way of saying it's all really important.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. We've talked here about why, or just questioning some of this, like why does this happen? And one of our conversations is about how when students participate in dual credit, they get the course and but they also learn about just how to go to college. Some of the barriers that they just don't think it's possible. But then when they take a dual credit course and they figure out, oh, this is how you enroll. Oh, this is how, this is who you contact when you have this problem or that problem, that there are some sort of incidental benefits that we don't really associate with dual credit that can really make a difference over the long haul. That is purely our our hunch about how that plays out. But I know that students get a lot of support from their high schools and from their post-secondary institutions when they enroll in dual credit for things like that, just learning how to go to college. So I think those are big. All right, Trinity, I'm going to turn things over to you now. If you have any questions, and we also can go ahead and start taking some questions in the chat if anybody has any.
For me, one of the things that is the core of my existence is always about collaboration. And so when we were talking prior to our webinar and planning, one of the things that I found to be really interesting is that those questions of like, why are certain regions a little bit lower in dual credit participation, and to which you talked about today of finding out what are those factors that are making those rates a little bit lower in those areas. So for me, my question really is, like, on a broad scale, if there are people on this call, and I know that most of us are aware or know most of these people in some capacity, but if there are people on this call that are interested in helping you with your data and understanding what's happening there and what's going on with their institutions and their regions, how can they help you with that? What can they do to contact you? What can we do to really collaborate and answer some of the questions that we still have about dual credit and what's happening in our state?
Yeah, I think right right out of the gate, I would say that, we're here to empower and to provide information to help folks here who are doing the work, um, that make these data possible. So if there are things, number one, if there are questions that folks have that we didn't cover with the data today, please let us know, and we'll answer it if we can, and if we can't, we'll find the person who can. Number two, anything that a suggestion or an idea, specifically, like for me, just as a research person, I'm really interested in that geographic disparity. I've lived in all three of those areas, and I can kind of make my own speculation, but I'm really interested to know what folks think or suggestions that they have that are causing those differences, how we can then study them empirically, um, through some deductive model, like here's some hypotheses, here's some uh, rationales. Now let's study these empirically. What can we do with qualitative research? So anybody who has the expertise that I don't, please try to help us, and we'll investigate, and see what we can do with data. Adam, what do you think?
No, I mean, I pretty much the same thing. I don't mean to be an echo with this point, but yeah, I think it's really, for our work in particular, it's really important for us to have kind of that context to work off of, because we can pull numbers on anything post-secondary related, but it's really the context and how we apply that matters at the end of the day.
Fantastic. Okay, we do have a couple questions here in the chat, and you may not have answers for this, either one of these questions at this point, but it might be something for us to dig into a little bit. Renee Pfister asks, what proportion of the courses taken by high school students are not able to be used for the specific associate or baccalaureate degrees?
I don't know that offhand, but I know that in some of the forthcoming work that we're going to be doing, specifically another inferential study on dual credit, we'll be looking at some of those in terms of we'll have 8 cohorts of graduates, I believe. So we're going to have a time series look at those data, and specifically we'll be able to kind of look at a good time period before and beyond COVID. So we'll be able to answer some of those questions, but I just don't know off the top of my head. The second one, we do have data available for the schools. We do have by the districts, and then of course we can cut it geographically. I'm not sure if there's kind of a specific question behind that, but if you're kind of interested in some like a specific district or a specific school, KY Stats or KDE. KY Stats has KDE data, so you could get those from either or we could get the approval to do an analysis of that. If there's a specific question there. I would also point you to the high school feedback reports. They don't dig into some of the nuances of these data like a presentation like this would, but there are a lot of college going indicators and other indicators in there. Again, that's the high school feedback report, which is published by KY Stats online. You can filter any high school and district there. What is the next question? Is that question regarding CTE dual credit? I'm not sure what that ties back to, but we do have CTE dual credit participation, and like if you think through the lenses of the scholarships that that are offered the work ready dual credit and then the general dual credit. We do have all of that participation, CTE, and kind of general included in our stuff here. Let's see. Each school partners with more than one post-secondary institution, therefore it makes it difficult for individual post-secondary institutions to know where to focus efforts to close the participation gap. Yeah, that's important context. What is the low-hanging fruit? What do you see as an analyst that makes you think that this should be an easy fix? Is it increased participation? What do you see? Adam, where does your kind of mind go in terms of low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, I think it's easy to say something's low-hanging fruit. It's another thing to actually enact or act upon that. I definitely think in terms of just general improvement to student outcomes in post-secondary ed, I would definitely say increased participation. As widespread as we can get that essentially is going to be the most impactful thing, right? That being said, it's how that's being done that gets a little tricky. Right. And one of these other questions was talking about some of that maybe coordination across post-secondary institutions, not really clearly being able to find or identify where some of those gaps are, which is where that trouble comes in, right? So, I wouldn't say this is necessarily low-hanging fruit, but I would go back to kind of that conversation about collaboration, working either with other post-secondary institutions or high schools directly um, to help kind of target some of those efforts to get students in from, different counties or from places where this may not really be as widely accessible of an opportunity, especially now when we're working with all the options for remote. I think it's a fantastic time to kind of expand this. It's just going to have to be in a very targeted and tailored way, which may not really be that low hanging of a fruit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, one thing that jumps out to me, I agree with everything you said. One thing that jumps out to me, and I'm not an expert on this either, but um, are the two things that jumped out for me from the demographic analysis again were the kind of racial and ethnic group gaps, which relates to the kind of the urban rural gaps. Um, and then, some low income gaps, which also those two things are related. But, I wonder if, just anecdotally, I would start going into, are there information gaps that are causing, some students to hear about opportunities and others not? Are there funding gaps in terms of book costs or some things at the local level that we can look at empirically from district to district, from high school to high school to see what is explaining these gaps. I don't know all the nuances of funding for dual credit and the scholarships and all that stuff or the costs associated at the individual level. But looking at the kind of outcome indicators that I have, that's where my mind would go first. So how can we study those things with data? What are causing these kind of challenges at the high school level? And then, is that something more importantly than that to me is what do we do about it? Is there legislation or policy that can be affected? Is there an opportunity for funding? Is there, some of these questions? That's kind of my logical approach to that.
All right, Chris, there was one, Susie Burkhart had another comment about her question earlier. She said it was about the credit transfer for degree, the relationship of the CTE dual credit. So when she was asking about, is that question regarding CTE dual credit from high school, she's talking about the one about credits that are used for associate or baccalaureate degrees.
Let's see here. So what was the original question? I
Well,
think I'm getting lost somewhere.
Renee's question was, what proportion of the courses taken by high school students are not able to be used for their specific degree? And then
Gotcha. Oh, okay. I
that
see.
regarding CTE dual credit, and it was related to that question.
Okay. Yeah, we don't have I don't have a solid answer right now about how many courses are able to be used or not being used. Um, like I said, we've got an inferential study that we're just starting to work on with a ton of data. The great thing about kind of our data sharing between KDE, KOS Stats, and CPE is that when we get data from them, we have all high school students who participated in dual credit who didn't. Whereas just in our shop only, we have we can only in our data system look at students who matriculated. So with this data set, we're kind of going to update the past inferential studies that we did, and as a part of that, we're going to look at what students are taking and how those translate into their degree outcomes, and how those compare to the high school students who did not participate in dual credit. So I can get back to you at some point with a specific answer about that. I just can't now.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've answered all the questions that came in on the Q&A, and we're a little bit past time. I want to just say a big thank you to Chris and Adam, first of all, for just being interested in dual credit, for caring about it and studying it so that you can really help us do the kind of programmatic work that that is happening all across the state. So just so appreciate you all. I think this is the most audience participation we've ever had on a webinar. So I think we hit a nerve today with your presentation, and just really really thankful for you all to be here and to share this good news with us. We're looking forward to the 2.0 study that's coming, and I know that that everybody who's interested in dual credit would be happy for you all to come back again. So let's just go ahead and put a pin on your calendars to say you're going to need to come back again and share with us the next iteration of what you've learned about dual credit, data wise in Kentucky. So we're really eager to see all of that. So I am going to go ahead and put in I think that you all will be able to see the chat. I said everyone. So this is the registration link to our webinar series. If you haven't already completed, I'm assuming if you're here, you've already done that. But if you haven't registered for the entire series, please go ahead and do so. So you'll get calendar invitations and updates about that, about what's coming up. And we hope that you'll join us again on October 8th. It's the second Tuesday of the month, which is when we will typically have these webinars again at 10 a.m. So looking forward to keeping the conversation going. And I believe, Chris, let's see here, Chris, we got to change it to everyone so that there we go. Chris and Adam's contact information is also there in the chat now, so you can reach out to them directly. And I know that Trinity will be sending out a summary with all this information, the recording link, and contact information as well. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thanks for tuning in today. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.